Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. We are, as they say, on to Arizona here this week. Luke Jones joins us now. Owings Mills will be the place all week that there is preparation for a team that tied last week, and Kyler Murray, and we got an update on Jimmy Smith as well. Wasn't all good news in a 59-10 win on Sunday down in Miami, was it, Luke?
Yeah, that really was the only damper when you consider how well the Ravens played. I mean, you set so many records. I mean, the offense, Lamar Jackson, sensational. Defense did their thing against a team that, face it, is tanking. But it was all good other than Jimmy Smith, I think it was the sixth defensive snap of the game. Patrick Owasso kind of crashes into his knee. Friendly fire, and he's going to miss some time. It's not a season-ending injury, but John Harbaugh said on Monday, quote, multiple weeks with a grade 2 MCL sprain. And typically, if you do some research on the Internet, you kind of remember players who've had grade 2 MCL sprains in the past. This is the kind of injury he's probably going to miss a month. I mean, that's really what I'm thinking the timetable is going to be. Maybe a little bit sooner, but typically Jimmy Smith's been a guy that we know he's had injuries. He's been a little bit of a slower healer sometimes. Although he came back pretty fast from the Achilles, to his credit, last year. But I think, the Ravens are certainly going to be without him for a few weeks, and this is just going to test that depth that much more. I mean, they're already missing Tavon Young, Amon Marshall, their fourth-round rookies on IR. He could come back later in the year, but certainly not anytime soon. So, they're one more injury away at corner from really being uncomfortable, but at this point now, you're talking about having to give meaningful snaps to Anthony Averett, who's someone that I've been high on going back to his rookie year, but now it's time to see what he can do. He held up okay against Miami, but we're definitely going to see him out there for the next few weeks because it appears they want Brandon Carr playing that nickel spot, and we're going to see Averett on the outside opposite Marlon Humphrey.
Double A in, and, Tavon Young out, and now Jimmy Smith. I mean, you wrote about the deep depth of the secondary, and God, we're not even 60 minutes into the season here against the tanking team, and the deep depth of the secondary has already been challenged. So we can talk about health and how Lamar is. We're all worried about Lamar more than anything else. But, around the edges, this is a week-by-week issue in the NFL that we don't feel in the offseason. This, waiting on the injury report is part of your lifestyle on Wednesdays, right?
It really is, and it's important. As much as we talk about next man up, what do I say all the time, Nestor? Going back to that 2015 season.
There's no replacing Joe Flacco when he's your $30 million quarterback.
And I said, at some point in time, next man up becomes a T-shirt slogan and nothing else, because you could keep trying to say that, but if you lose enough guys, it is going to impact your football team, and it's going to cost you games, and it's going to cost you what could be a meaningful season. I mean, that's just the reality. And I'm not saying the Ravens are anywhere close to that. If there's one spot they can endure a couple injuries, it's certainly the cornerback position. But let's keep in mind, still questions about the pass rush, as well as they played up front against Miami. I'm not at all convinced that means their pass rush is fine moving forward. So if there's still questions about getting pressure on quarterbacks, you need to be able to cover extremely well on the back end. Well, you don't have Tavon Young for the rest of the year. Jimmy Smith is out for several weeks, in John Harbaugh's words, and we know Harbaugh typically is going to make something sound not as bad as it is. So
several gives me 4. Several's 4 if I'm John Harbaugh.
That tells me it's going to be at least 4, 3 or 4, and that's about the timetable for a grade 2 MCL. So they're going to be without 2 of their top 3 corners that they're playing with at any given point on the field. So that's a challenge. Now, they have the depth, and again, that's good, and I think they'll be okay, but it's one thing to be okay against the Arizona Cardinals. It's another thing when you start talking about some opponents moving forward. I know Tyreek Hill doesn't look like he's going to play in that Kansas City game in Week 3, so that helps, but we know Cleveland, Week 1 performance notwithstanding, still has a ton of talent at the wide receiver position. Pittsburgh, we'll see what they figured out at that point after their Week 1 loss, but they've got some games coming up where they need their defense to be sharp and on point, and not having Jimmy Smith out there makes it that much more challenging. But, again, Anthony Averett is someone they've liked is someone who's played well in some shorter spurts, some limited opportunities, but we're going to find out about him, which, let's keep in mind, Smith entering the final year of his current contract, and he's 31 years old. You kind of need to find out about a guy like Anthony Averett, because if he shows you he can be a starter, he shows you he can be that kind of player, makes it that much.
This is where Tavon Young, other guys came from. That you get an opportunity and you play, and this is where the opportunity comes from. We may never hear Jimmy Smith again, right? Literally.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be back this year, and I don't think he'll be Wally pipped to a dramatic degree. But if Anthony Averett plays well, who knows? And certainly that bodes well. That would bode well for 2020 and beyond, because ideally, yeah, you'd love a fourth-round pick to be able to step into a starting role like Tavon Young did a couple years back. So it's definitely an opportunity for Averett, and the Ravens have the depth there, but it's definitely a challenge, and it's unsettling. Deep depth is great until it's not deep anymore, then it becomes a concern, and the Ravens are very much moving into that territory here with the injuries they've suffered, as you pointed out, just 60 minutes into the regular season.
Well, let's move on from the semi-important stuff to the really important stuff. How did Joe Flacco do late night Monday night? I stayed up, and the Drew Brees, that was a game there, right? I mean, and they should start all Monday Night Football at 7 o'clock. I agree with Andrew Brand on that. But having the game get over by 10:15, then Joe Flacco came on out in Oakland, out on the dust of a baseball field. I love that Justin Forsett said, "Go outside, jump up, land on concrete." That's what it feels like to land on the dirt in Oakland. And Joe Flacco lost the opener on the road to the Oakland Raiders with no points at halftime, with playing from behind the whole game. It looked like the Ravens' offense in white uniforms, quite frankly.
Yeah, it wasn't good, and it wasn't all on him, but I think you look at the final numbers, 21 of 31, 268 yards and a touchdown. He wasn't that good. I mean, he made some throws late in that game, and I thought they were incredibly conservative. I mean, Denver just ran the ball on first down, ran the ball on first down, ran the ball on first down, and that's really counterintuitive to what football analytics say you should do in today's game. And, okay, the Ravens are a little bit of an exception to that norm, but you even saw how aggressive the Ravens were throwing the ball week one. So he did have a receiver drop a pass in the end zone, what would have been a short touchdown. I believe it was Deshaun Hamilton dropped that one. His offensive line was not very good whatsoever, but...
Well, he lost his right tackle first series, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are certain things you can point to that was out of his control, but wasn't incredibly accurate. It took a couple sacks where he needed to get rid of the football. And, I mean, just in Denver, just in general, Denver, their defense is supposed to be their calling card, and Derek Carr carved them up. 22 of 26, 259
Derek
yards.
Carr looked so good you thought Jack Del Rio was coaching the team.
You would think that they already had Antonio Brown or they never needed him. Impressive performance for the Raiders and Denver. Vic Fangio, not an impressive coaching debut for him. I thought they were way too conservative playing on the road, and I think Joe Flacco. I've said all along, I'm hoping he does well. I'm hoping he has a next chapter that lasts a long time, but what I saw week one did not look like a guy who necessarily, even though there's no one else because the rookie quarterback's hurt right now, but not looking like a guy that's necessarily going to be the long-term answer in Denver, and I think most people kind of anticipated that. But, as we said, talking about all the good examples like the Ravens or the Tennessee Titans or the bad examples like Pittsburgh or Cleveland or whichever other team you want to point to and say, wow, that was a really bad week one loss. It is only week one, and it's the one game of the season we react to more than any other game. So we'll see what Flacco looks like in week two. But, yeah, to your point, looked a little bit too much like some of those Ravens offenses we'd seen at least the last 2 or 3 years. Going back beyond that, I'd say a little different. But I'd also remind, Joe got off to a good start last year. It wasn't until his last game or two before he got hurt that the offense really started to bog down. That offense was really good in the first month of the season. He was quite good in the first month of the season, but not so much Monday night, even if statistically, his performance bounced back a little bit late, but it was a little too late for the Broncos.
You know what, Luke? I enjoyed Monday Night Football and the doubleheader and sitting around and watching. The Sunday I was traveling, and the Sunday night game stunk, and even the Browns game stunk on Sunday. As I drink some Royal Farms coffee here to get my day going, I'm shocked by how many Ravens connections there really are in the league, right? Like, I lay awake Monday night waiting to watch Joe Flacco, and Vic Fangio's the coach. And I know Vic Fangio from being with Brian Billick. And then you look on the other sideline, and you're like, oh, there's Chucky. Oh, they're playing in Oakland. We played a big game in Oakland 20 years ago. And there's John Gruden. No, that's right. He was part of that. And let's look in the booth. Oh, there's Brian Greasy in the booth. He started the game 2 weeks before in Denver. So there's just so much of that going on as I watch these games. And then the New Orleans Saints have a kicker that's not Kerry Vedvik that's winning football games. I mean, it's a great league. And I know Adam Beasley, my buddy from Miami, tweeted, I love the National Football League. There is a point where sitting and watching two games on a Monday night, I can't tell you the next time I'm going to watch two baseball games on a day. Maybe I'll do that in playoff time. Maybe I stay awake for late night hockey or whatever. But I do like football that much. And I do like the personalities and the people and the teams and the colors. And I do miss it for 9 months. And I just want to say that one time before I tear into politics this week and Baltimore Positive on Thursday and Thread and mentoring kids and what Ben Jealous is going to do and Brandon Scott, because I'm into all that. But when football starts, it gets me to a different level. And I think anybody that watched, let's say you watched the New Orleans-Houston game between 9 and 10 o'clock on Monday night, that's what makes the game great, right? Drew Brees and Deshaun Watson, throwing the ball, catching the ball, kicking the ball, measuring the clock. You know, it was a good football game, and that much better than the slop I sat through Sunday in Miami. I'm just excited that football's here because this is what I do, and the Orioles have made it very, very difficult to follow sports the last 8 months, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll hear you on that. I mean, I'm still someone who loves baseball. I'm still someone who's watched the Orioles plenty. I mean, either professionally or even at home, still watching it more than I would care to admit, because that's just kind of my routine.
I get you, man. I mean, and I'm 51. In my 51st summer, I've spent the summer worrying about Baltimore Positive and doing other things. Sure. Maybe in your 51st summer, if they lose for 15 more years, maybe you won't want to sit there and watch them lose 110 games either. That, and I can't blame anybody that doesn't, and I can't blame you because you love baseball. Like, I love football, and people in Miami love football. They showed up to see the Dolphins play Sunday. Several friends of mine did, and they love football, but it's not going to be fun for them either.
Right. I mean, but at the same time, I totally get your sentiment, and I think that's why it's important for the Ravens to have gotten off to a good start, because it is something that people have been waiting for. And okay, there's plenty of good things going on for the Orioles down on the farm system, but that's still a year or two away at the earliest. So that's why Lamar Jackson having the performance that he did on Sunday, I think, is important. It gives the city some juice from a sports standpoint, which, frankly, it needs. And certainly the Ravens provided some of that at the end of last year, even with the way the season came to an end with a thud against the Chargers in the playoffs. But it's exciting. And, I mean, football season's fun. I mean, as much as there are times where I grow a little weary of the amount of coverage 365 days a year when you really think how many games are actually played. I mean, at least baseball, people complain about NBA coverage, but at least the season has 82 games, and baseball 162, hockey 82. I mean, you have seasons that are really long and have plenty of games. The NFL, there's 16 Sundays. I mean, there are.
Dude, the Raiders have told the city of Oakland we're leaving, and people still showed up last night and didn't fight and didn't tear the stadium up.
I've said this to you before. I still find that to be one of the more bizarre dynamics across professional sports.
I can't get my head around that, but I've been out there and I know those people.
I mean, I just think of every example you can think of. I mean, for every example, like the Colts leaving in the middle of the night, which even though I think there was a sense of inevitability with that long before that.
But the city might have showed up out there and circled the facility at that point in 1984. That might have happened.
I think back to the Houston Oilers. Certainly the Browns before they came to Baltimore and became the Ravens. I mean, you think of all these different examples of cities that knew they were losing a team and they stopped going, or if they went, there was such an animosity to it.
I was at the Browns game in Cleveland in '95 when Cincinnati showed up. It was insane.
And I understand it. Like, I'm not condoning anyone being violent or anything of that nature, but you totally understand people being ticked and disappointed and devastated and any negative emotion you can think of. But for the Raiders, and I even go back to Mark Davis talking about this when there was all the different rumors about where they were heading, and whether it was Carson, Inglewood, go Las Vegas, wherever, St. Louis. All the different possibilities, and he had this talk that Raider Nation needs a home, and we'll figure this out, fans. It was just such a weird. It really speaks to the Raiders being a national brand and not a civic brand, even though they've spent most of their existence in Oakland. But they did spend quite a bit of time in L.A. before. They're going to be in Las Vegas. But, you saw the enthusiasm at an all-time high, and the whole Antonio Brown situation galvanized that city. And, look, I have nothing against Oakland, but the reaction and how they've handled that compared to, I feel, just about any other city you could imagine losing its professional sports franchise. It's something I have a hard time wrapping my head around it.
All right, I want to get a little baseball out of you before we go, because you've watched baseball the last couple weeks. If you are an Oriole fan putting this on for the Dodgers this week or whatever it's going to be, give me 2 or 3 players that I should be paying attention to for next April. Seriously.
Yeah, first of all, Austin Hayes was just called up. He got his feet wet over the weekend, and that was kind of an interesting dynamic. He missed some time this year. He didn't have a great year. He missed some time with injuries, which has kind of been the story for him the last couple of years. But I can tell you, Mike Elias and the new regime, they're high on him. I think in a perfect world, they'd like him to be their center fielder next year. So, and they were going to send him to the Arizona Fall League, and that's why he didn't get called up initially. But the Fall League started a little bit earlier this year. Baseball passed a rule that said, hey, anyone on 40-man rosters can play in the majors, and then they can join the Arizona Fall League after that. Before, he kind of had to choose one or the other. So he's going to be up. He's not going to play every single day necessarily, but he's going to play quite a bit, and we should see him quite a bit in center field. So he's one guy. As far as call-ups go, it's kind of tough to identify anyone else because they're not calling up Mountcastle. They're not calling up Keegan Aiken. Those are 2 guys that I think we're going to see in 2020 much sooner than later, but they're 2 guys who they still want to see get a little bit better before they just put them in the major leagues and potentially expose them to some failures. So of guys that have been around, guys that I think are legitimately part of next year's plans and have a chance to be part of not just next year where they're still going to be in this holding pattern and still going to have a lot of filler, even though they're going to mix in a couple more prospects, certainly. Anthony Santander, look at the numbers. 285, he's slugging .512. He's hit for pop from both sides of the plate. While he's not a center fielder at all, and the fact that they've had him in center field speaks to the state of their major league outfield defense. I think he's a perfectly fine corner outfielder, and he's played extensively since June, and he's looked the part, and he's young enough to think that he can get a little bit better, and to think that this isn't just some flash-in-the-pan 28-year-old who's coming up and having a nice month or two. This is a guy who hit a lot in the minor leagues before the Orioles claimed him in the Rule 5 draft. And he's had some injuries, and he's had injuries in Baltimore, but he's 24 years old, and he has 18 home runs and driven in 51 runs. He's got 19 doubles.
And I now know how to pronounce his last name.
Yeah, and they finally figured out it was Santander, not Santander. So of the young guys that we've seen this year, remember, Dwight Smith was kind of the flavor of the month early in the year, and then he really fell off big time. Santander.
In April, he looked like he was going to the All-Star game, right?
Yeah. He looked like he was a real piece. So that's where I do mention Dwight Smith and say, okay, talking about Santander, that could happen to him too, but he's played 82 games. He has 330 at-bats this year, and he has 38 extra base hits, and he has an OPS of 831. And the exciting thing is he's hit consistently from both sides of the plate. So that to me, that's interesting, and that's he's someone that the previous regime liked. They held on to him despite some of the injuries, being a Rule 5 pick. So he's a guy. Beyond that, we know about Mancini, obviously. Nunez is hit for power. I still don't know what else he's going to bring to the table from a long-term perspective. But those are the guys.
I'm wondering who the 5 pitchers are going to be they start next year with. They a year into it, that should be crystallized that it's, we sort of knew it wasn't going to be Cashner, right? You know what I mean? And we sort of knew it wasn't going to be, give me the Cobb, the guy that never pitches from Tampa, right? So, we knew it was going to be young guys.
Cobb's going to be under contract for 2 more years. The thought is hopefully he's going to step into the kind of role that Cashner had this year, which the Orioles were able to move him then. Cashner had a really good first half. He's been pretty lousy for the Red Sox, or at least to the point where they moved him to the bullpen.
Hasn't everyone? The only one that's been great for the Red Sox has been Alex Cora, right? That's it, right?
Fired their general manager. How about that? Defending
and then don't show up to tell anybody.
Yeah,
in the middle of the Patriots game.
Just wild, right? But
that's all class, Boston. Keep it classy.
Yeah. Right. To answer your question, though, clearly John Means is going to be in the rotation. It's been nice to see him bounce back over his last 3 or 4 starts after he didn't look so hot post All-Star break. Bundy's going to be in the rotation because, well, who else is it going to be? He's at least someone who is going to go out there and take the ball consistently. I mentioned Cobb. Those are going to be your 3 de facto default starters, whatever you want to describe them as. And then after that, I think in a perfect world, you'd like to see Keegan Aiken, even though he had some issues with walks at AAA, and he was kind of a victim, as many AAA pitchers were, of the Major League Baseball being in play because home runs were up about 60% at the AAA level this year. So his numbers don't look overly impressive, but I still think he's got the arm and the potential to be at least a back half of the rotation kind of starter. So I think he'll have a chance to win a job out of spring training. And then that 5th spot is probably going to be
fun,
up for grabs.
Fun, right.
Which, the Orioles had contending clubs in recent years where you didn't know who the 5th starter was going to be. So I'm not saying it's going to be a good rotation, but if you're going to ask me to handicap it right now, that's kind of how I see it shaking out as we're winding down here the last couple weeks and getting into the off season. But hey, the good news, even though it's not going to be apparent in 2020, take a look at Double A, take a look at Single A, take a look at Delmarva as well. Look at the pitching there. There's quite a crop of guys that are interesting to really exciting. You have guys that could be Major League pitchers at worst, and then you have guys like Grayson Rodriguez, D.L. Hall, who are guys that could be top half of the rotation kind of Major League starters, especially Grayson Rodriguez I'm particularly high on. And, Delmarva had a tough end to their season after they made the playoffs, but he was really, really impressive as a 19-year-old, and even got a chance to meet him out at the ballpark a little bit earlier in the summer. And impressive, mature, and really big for a 19-year-old. He struck me as more a college graduate than a 19-year-old who really dominated at the Single A level this year.
No chance they're going to tank this weekend and let the Tigers move to second place? They're going to get the number 2 pick at this point, right?
It's hard to say. The Orioles have really struggled over the last week, especially after they had been played okay for the week or two before that. But Detroit has been as woeful as the Orioles.
Let's let them sweep us this weekend just to make it interesting going to the final poll. The last.
Yeah, why not? As it stands, the Tigers have already reached 100 losses. The Orioles are on the cusp of 100 losses, but the Orioles have kind of had that 3 to 5 game advantage over the Tigers for quite some time now. So we will see how it plays out. It's certainly not a pennant race, but it is something that's relevant. But the good news for all this losing, at least the Orioles are looking like the number 2 pick is a pretty safe bet now. Kansas City has kind of moved ahead of them quite emphatically, and you kind of look at the rest of the teams, and there's no one really seriously challenging The
We
Orioles
suck
or the
less. Yes. All right. The Lee Tessier team hotline is what Luke Jones is calling in on. He'll be out in Owings Mills all week and monitoring the Orioles as they burn down the season here in Arizona, coming into town with Kyler Murray. So we'll be all over that. We'll be talking to lots of folks out in the desert, including Glenn Bubba Parker, Kent Summers, many others who cover the Cardinals, so full coverage around here, including Baltimore Positive with Sarah Heminger of Thread on Thursday at Jennings Cafe. Friday, we move down the street for Ben Jealous at State Fair. Next week, we'll be back at Fadley's on Thursday with City Council President Brandon Scott. And on the 30th of the month, we'll be at Adams Jeep up in Aberdeen, chatting with Nick Boyle and swabbing for There Goes My Hero and the Bone Marrow Registry. I've gone on and on about all of our sponsors, whether it's Freedmont Mortgage sponsoring our Monday night. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. Carl Delmont working up the Harrisburg Heat to fight with the Baltimore Blast. Pizza John's, always closed on Monday, but always open in my heart. 51 years now doing it back River Neck Road. Go check out my favorite pizza. Don't forget a cheesesteak, and don't sleep on that ravioli as well. While you're in Essex, stop by. See the all-new Al's Seafood, remodeled, refurbished, delightful, and the dining room's open. Go see Chad the Crab Man down there. Pick up a six-pack to go as well. And last but never least, Sydney Newsonoff and our friends at Charles Newsonoff & Sons taking great care of my wife's wedding ring. They can take care of yours. They can sell you a wedding ring, take care of your wife for jewelry, or yourself for a watch, or maybe you need an engagement ring because that's where you are in life, in love. Sydney's been doing that a long time. Charles Newsonoff & Sons, go see them, 410-661-5050. That's charlesnewsonoff.com. I am Nestor, drinking out of my Cole roofing mug and the Royal Farms Kona blend and getting you ready for week 2 of the National Football League. I'm onward and upward. In the Buy at Toyota.com audio vault with great guests all week long, including Reverend Al Hathaway, Dick Cass, Ron Shapiro, great Baltimore Positive guests, as well as all the cool stuff we do around here. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.